friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Hey guys, it's the MC Lars podcast with your host, DJ Jerry. No, just playing. MC Lars. What's up, y'all? It is New Year's Eve 2018, and I want to thank you all for subscribing to my podcast this year. It's been great. I've had a lot of fun, and this is episode freaking 18 with George Watsky. George Watsky came into like viral prominence in January of 2011, I think. He did a YouTube video, Pale Kid Raps Fast, right? Where he rapped fast over the Busta Rhymes beat. But it was funny, it was quick, it was good. It was like, you definitely could tell the kid had skills. He retitled it Watsky Raps Fast because for some reason, whatever. And then years went by. He put out great records. He made great videos. He put out a book, which is called How to Ruin Everything, which is really funny and dope. And somehow through all this, like early on Twitter, someone tagged us both and he tweeted me that he was a fan of mine. And we both were from the Bay. We connected in real life at Warped Tour when Warped Tour came to Mountain View. But before that, we started emailing about doing a song together, which many of you have heard. It's called Never Afraid. And in my bio on the website, I wrote that how my mom was a librarian. And I think George saw that and he had an idea that we could do a song about having librarian moms, giving him a shout out. So that song became Never Afraid. And the video is super dope. And it's one of my favorite tracks I've ever worked on. So Watsky has done lots of awesome stuff. If you've seen what's called Blind Spotting, he has a cameo in that movie. And he's about to go on tour. What is his website? It's georgewatsky.com. And he'll be on tour this spring and winter. So check it out because his show is awesome. It starts January 31st in Nashville, georgewatsky.com. So that's what's up. He's got a new EP coming out and he's doing a lot of awesome stuff. This is my interview with him. We've only hung out like a handful of times, but I feel like we kind of get each other and have a similar passion. And I admire what this dude does. So check it out. This is my interview with George Watsky. Oh, before we get into that, shout out to everyone who's been supporting on Patreon. I just put out the Narnia EP and we got some new supporters this week. Shout out to John, Daniel, and Kenneth. Thank you, homies. And of course, I want to shout out some of the older supporters. Shout out to Matt, James, and Roger. So that's what's up. Happy New Year, everyone. Enjoy my interview. And thank you again for your support. I'll talk to you guys after with some final thoughts. Peace. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with George Watsky.
What's going on, Lars?
Thank you for having time to meet up.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for crossing town, coming to the east side.
You know, LA, it's like you get used to the geography of it. It becomes like this trade-off of where your intentions are, right? Like if you have time to meet with someone or to do a studio project, and if you're willing to go from Venice to Silver Lake, that means it's important.
Yeah.
But like Venice to Culver City means, well, I kind of like this mastering guy. He's in my budget, you know?
Right. Yeah. East side, west side is definitely a divide.
When you're down here, do you meet a lot of like Bay Area transplants?
Yeah, but it's hard to say how much that's because I'm putting myself in a position, either because I know a lot of people in my Bay Area circle already, or because I'm doing the type of things like poetry readings that Bay Area types are likely to show up at. I see a lot of Bay people, and I think that the east side, like Silver Lake, where I've ended up, Bay people gravitate towards it because it's got a density and like a hilliness that is similar to the Bay.
Yeah, that's interesting. How can you tell? Like, can you tell if someone's from the Bay Area before they even talk?
No, at this point, it's hard to tell how much I've maintained my Bayness. I hope a lot, but at the same time, I've also been here for like 8 years now. So it's hard to tell. Also, hella has been so co-opted nationally that like sometimes people say hella or they'll be playing like a DJ spinning Mac Dre at a party and I'll be like, oh shit, you're from the Bay. And they'll be like, no, I'm just playing Mac Dre.
I'm just a fan.
Yeah, Bay Area culture has seeped everywhere.
Do you hear Maney?
No, I don't hear Maney except for seeing Maney on my Twitter feed from people that I know from the Bay. Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you will end up back there in San Francisco?
I could. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the few places I could see myself settling down. I've got older parents, and as they get older, I could see myself definitely trying to like, make sure they're well taken care of. They still live in San Francisco, so I don't know. There's a lot in LA for me. My friend group is here. A lot of my collaborators are here, but more and more now, like there were a few years where most of my friends weren't in the Bay, and now people are starting to kind of settle back down there, at least some pockets of friends starting to like get married and put their roots down.
So do you feel inspired down here?
Yeah, I do. But it's not like LA that inspires me. It's the people that I'm around. And I have a really cool group of creative friends, and dating someone now who's really inspiring to me. And just, I feel like I'm surrounded by curious people, and that makes me curious.
You had curious parents, didn't you? Or you do have curious parents, I mean. Yeah,
I do. I mean, in certain ways, and I have really smart parents. They're both readers. They both, like, we have librarian mothers in common, I know. So there were just books everywhere. My dad was constantly reading to me, and he's just very fascinated with history and literature. And so, yeah, there was always like book discovery reading going on in my house.
Your dad's a psychologist, is that right?
He's a psychologist by day and a poet by night. Yeah, he's a Jungian analyst specifically. So he's a depth psychologist, which for those of you who are listening who don't know the difference between a depth psychologist and a CB, a cognitive behavioralist, those are the two sort of major schools of therapy thought right now. CBs make up the majority of therapists that people have, but the depth psychologists are like the Freudians and the Jungians. And my dad is a Jungian, do a lot of dream analysis, a lot of work on the intersection between the subconscious and creativity and early childhood trauma and that stuff. So it's pretty fascinating stuff, and I think has made him a really good listener too.
Do you feel like you were always super supported when you wanted to create art and poetry?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. My dad calls it the family business. So he's really proud. And I think at first my parents had that worry of, no parent wants to see their kid set up for disappointment and to set themselves up to give me an unrealistic expectation about what's possible, because it obviously is super competitive. And at that point when I was growing up, the sort of vast opportunity created by the internet for this cast of middle class artists was only starting to be a thing. And so I think that it felt even less attainable at that point than it does now, where, I really believe at this point, the internet has created a lot of opportunity for someone who's willing to work hard. Whereas in the past, I think to have a career as an artist may have taken more of that combination of hard work plus just right place, right time, when the gatekeepers say, okay, we're going to let you in. And so I think they were worried at first that maybe I wouldn't be able to support myself. But once they started seeing that I was paying rent and I graduated college, I'd been out for a few years and I wasn't coming back, to need support, they were fully on board.
The magic of the internet.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Best of times, worst of times. It's really, for everything that's horrible about the internet, it's the democratization of information has done so many amazing things for just the flow of information for artists. It's totally fascinating.
You talked about the gatekeepers in media, and it's interesting because you and I both came up, like, I'm a few years older than you, but we both came up in the Bay as like fans of the indie rap stuff, and like fans of Company Flow and Sage Francis. And you talked to Spose about when you did your first record, you sent CDs to the labels, like to the PO boxes.
Yeah. And
I always felt, starting out, being kind of a weird, quirky rapper, people weren't trying to necessarily, it wasn't disrespectful, but it was people didn't quite understand me. And I got my break going, I studied abroad in Oxford as a sophomore. Yeah. And it was the British people who kind of understood me. And I feel like nowadays with hip hop, it's not the people who run the labels and the older MCs who decide who's next. That helps for sure, but it's liberating in a way. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, like what kind of like the indie rap you listened to and like how you saw yourself in that world when you first started sending those CDs to labels and stuff.
In my mind, I just wanted approval from or a cosign from the people who I loved. I figured, these are the people that I admire, who are building their careers in ways that I admire, that are doing work that I think is important and is honest. And, like I want to be a part of this family. I think I sent my record to, I want to say Strange Famous, Quantum, Rhymesayers, the indie hip hop juggernauts, the ones that were like really doing respected work. And that's not a tactic I would necessarily recommend to people anymore, like so much self-released stuff. This was 2009. So YouTube had been around for 4 years, but it hadn't been breaking like new acts really yet. So it was kind of the cusp of that changing. And yeah, things have changed. A lot of those artists are still around. I mean, you're playing with Living Legends tonight, which is amazing. And what Rhymesayers has done in Minneapolis is still, like, in my opinion, the gold standard of indie hip hop in terms of like putting your roots down in a city, making that city yours, and then using that as a launching point for a national career and lifting that region up. So I still think there's a lot to learn. I mean, from what Tech9 has done in Kansas City too, I think there's relevant parts of the conversation for Macklemore in Seattle, although his trajectory is different, and he kind of was breaking hugely nationally at the same time. And it was also like changing the rules about how big an indie release could be when The Heist came out in, I think, 2014, maybe 13. But yeah, I mean, I guess the main thing for me is the rules are always changing. The rules are there to be broken. It's just, however you can get your music out to the world, if you're doing it in a way that you feel proud of, just be creative and be nimble.
Do you make sure every day you write like consistently? Like, do you be like, okay, no phone calls this time, I'm going to be working on poetry or lyrics?
If I'm in a crunch time for a project, yeah. Usually for albums, that's like the last 2 weeks of really being in studio sessions. But I do work very hard. I mean, I think my time is sort of split between writing the next project and then promoting the previous project. So trying to divide my time, trying to make sure promotion doesn't take up too much of my time so that, we actually are doing the thing that we're supposedly are, being
right.
creators instead of just being marketers for our own shit. So I think part of it for me the last few years has been making sure that I'm surrounded by enough talented people who are down to wear some of the hats that it might not be productive for me to spend all my days like transcoding footage or, all those indie hustler things that you got to do at the beginning.
And then learning how it changes every year too. Like,
yeah.
So you have a team. Do you feel like you've had the same team since the beginning of management and stuff?
I haven't had the same manager since the beginning. I changed management recently. I was at a company called Steel Wool that I helped to found. And there just was a huge burden of work on my manager, and he was running the company basically and managing me. And so now I'm at a place called Blood Company that is mostly notable in the past for have big electronic artists, but they have a pretty diverse roster. And my manager now, Jeff O'Neill, is super cool, like very talented, very savvy with the internet. So it's been really, really great so far. In terms of my band, that's been very consistent over the years. However, my drummer, Chukudi, the Welcome to the Family tour was his last tour with me. So we had a big kind of like tearful goodbye at the Pomona show in the last one. It was something that we knew was going to happen for a while. And he's been a backbone of my band, probably the most consistent member since the Nothing Like the First Time tour in 2012. But at this point, I have a very consistent core group of people that I work with. But every tour, every project is like, I'll reach out to people and ask if they want to do it. And people might take one, say, hey, I'll catch you on the European run. I'll do the next one. And I usually have subs that I can reach out to like a second call for a bass player, keyboard player. So I keep the same core, but I don't want anyone to think that like, you know, they're beholden to working in my world if it's not making sense for what they're doing.
How do you strike that delicate balance between friend and collaborator and boss? Like, could you have, what, 7 people out with you typically? Yeah.
It's really important to me to like not act like a boss and also like to create the environment where like people can talk shit to me and it's fine. We can talk shit to each other, you know, like you don't have to walk on pins and needles and like protect my feelings. If you're my friend, you can talk to me like a friend, and that's the relationship that I want. Like nobody is going to get fired for having friction with me as long as they're being an upstanding citizen, you know, treating people right, like respecting the rules of the road, respecting our audience. Like they have a job with me for life and they're going to be my first call. So I think like knowing that nobody's on the chopping block unless you like do something that's just fundamentally not okay, which doesn't include, you know, slighting me. I think that's important, like trying to create a sense of democracy. Like if there's an important personnel decision, I'm bringing someone new in, I talk to the band first because it's going to affect their lives too if we're bringing a new member in. So it's a tough balance to strike. I'm not always sure I'm doing it right, but I do try to like always keep my pulse on how the other people around me are feeling. And yeah, it is tough. It's something you learn over the years.
Your cousin plays keys with you, right?
Yeah.
So he's literally your family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, like I think the way to look at it is like I'm not really your boss. This is like an independent contractor for hire thing. And like, you know, I'm hiring you on this project and maybe you'll be hiring me on the next one. Like I don't own you. Like I'm not in a hierarchy above you. I just happen to be giving you work on this project and, you know, keep it moving. I think as long as both people go in knowing that it doesn't have to be weird.
What was it like being a San Francisco kid studying at Emerson? Was that a culture shock?
I don't know. Like I'd been to the East Coast a bunch because my grandma's from Manhattan and I love the cold.
Yeah.
So I feel like I was pretty ready for it. I guess in a way I don't know. It didn't feel that new for me. It was exciting. I was stoked to be in college and I'm generally like pretty adventurous with new experiences. Boston has, I think, some baked in racism that's probably a little bit deeper under the surface of the Bay than it is in Boston. Boston has like this like blue state collegiate wokeness, but also has some ugly long-term racism and is very segregated. Being a white college student, I don't think I was really subjected to it in any way, but it was something that I noticed and made me uncomfortable at certain times out there. Friends who were like afraid to ride certain subway lines and go through neighborhoods. And so that tension was bigger. And just seeing how from block to block, you know, you'd have one block in Jamaica Plain or Dorchester that was like, this is like the strongly Cape Verdean neighborhood. And then a couple blocks over from that, you had another like sort of micro community that I guess you see more stuff like that in New York and Boston than in the Bay, where things have gotten a little more homogenized, even though you do have gentrification and segregation too.
Did you ever imagine an alternate reality where you would have stayed in Boston?
I don't think so. No,
Yeah.
Boston was like a college city for me for sure.
Yeah.
But I love Boston and I have respect for it. Even you talk to like Boston natives about the art scene in Boston, and a lot of them have a love-hate relationship with the city too. A feeling that historically Boston has had a tendency to kind of eat its young and to not support up-and-coming artists. That like there is a bit of this like self-destructive regionalism where people can kind of like, you know, have that like crab in a bucket mentality. Someone's getting too big, and it's not a city that always supports its up-and-comers, unfortunately, because there have been great talents in Boston over the years. But it has been hard for them to break out onto a national stage.
Do you think the Bay does have that kind of camaraderie and support?
Yes and no. I mean, the hyphy movement was probably a high watermark, and now I think maybe we're at another high watermark too with like Kalani and G-Eazy. I Am Sue. There is kind of a resurgence right now in Bay Area artists. So, but it does feel like there have been long periods of time where not that many artists were coming out of the Bay nationally, which was always so weird because of how much talent there is. And it was like you had like E40 had like one big national radio hit in a period of like 7 years or something, and other than that, it's like you go back to like MC Hammer and like a little handful of other people.
You're a fan of the Beat generation, right? We talked about that.
Yeah, I am. I wouldn't say like I have an encyclopedic knowledge of the Beats, but I had an appreciation for like going to poetry readings in North Beach and did some like readings with Lawrence Ferlinghetti and those like surviving people when I was doing the teen poetry slam thing out there.
I always felt, the reason I bring that up is I always felt like that community, even though, there are elements of it that were like problematic about the Beats, of course, like there was this kind of, this camaraderie that I always found with the Bay Area hip hop scene. And then in my career, connecting with like some of the nerdcore guys, like Frontalot, he's from the Bay, you know what I mean? Like meeting you and getting to know you and stuff, like it's, the reason I brought that up is because it seems like I've always found there is that kind of fellowship in the Bay, even if it's not like a commercial thing, right?
I guess I have to have a caveat of, I think the conversation that I was having was more about like mainstream artists coming out of the Bay, but in the underground scene, 100%. And yeah, I mean, Quantum, I think maybe started in Sacramento or Davis or something, but I consider that like a NorCal Bay thing. Living Legends, the poetry scene. I mean, the spoken word scene in the Bay Area was really strong. And coming up as a teenager, there was crossovers. I and I did a lot of stuff with the poetry scene in the Bay, and the San Francisco youth poetry scene was probably the strongest organization in the country that did spoken word for teenagers and created this really fertile ground for teenagers to be doing open mics and slams at the Opera House, to have like 3,000 people come out to the finals every year, and to be empowering these kids to then 10 years later have leadership roles in these same nonprofit organizations doing spoken word literacy work in the Bay. I mean, that was really incredible.
And I know you got your start, like that was some of your first performances. You were in high school, right? When you did that, or middle school maybe?
No, I was in high school. I think I went to my first workshop as a freshman in high school. I was 15, and then my sophomore year, I did the teen poetry slam for the first time, and then kept doing it throughout high school, then took a year off after high school and worked full time at that nonprofit You Speaks before I went off to college. I took a gap year and worked there doing like school visits, doing poetry workshops and performances.
That's awesome. So you knew that was, you going to college was what tools so you could be a better writer and performer. It wasn't like you weren't trying to do something other than write and create, right?
I think I always knew that I wanted to do a combination of writing and performing. And that's what blew my mind about spoken word when I first saw it, was that I went to see Def Poetry Jam as a Broadway show before it went to Broadway. That was when I was a freshman in high school. And I went back like 3 or 4 times and felt like this art form was at the intersection of all the things that I wanted to do already. It was involved writing, monologuing, wordplay, performance. It was funny. It was serious. It allowed you to make your own rules and was engaging to the crowd. It was like not this exclusive thing, but was very much like an accessible art form, which is something that I've always been interested in. I've had a lot of arguments, like friendly conversations with my dad over the years about like, populist art versus trying to write something for specific academic communities. And I've always really wanted to reach a large audience. Like I see art as a conversation, as a communication between you and the person who's listening. And not everyone agrees with that. But what I love about spoken word is that it's always felt like that. It's always felt like a dialogue between the audience and the person on stage. So I got into that, and then college for me was like, okay, how do I like look at these skills that I wanted to have and try and get some support in them. And so yeah, college was writing and performing. My major was called writing and acting for the screen and stage. It was a create your own major.
That's cool. Couldn't be more appropriate.
Yeah. They had to jump through a few hoops at Emerson to do that. But ultimately, I felt like I got a lot out of college.
Have other students taken that major? Or you were the first, you're saying?
Well, they just have a program called IDIP, which is an independent studies thing where you basically take 2 departments at the school and you have to petition the chairs of each department to be able to take classes in the other department, because Emerson lets you in based on what your specific field of study is. And it can be really hard as a non-major to gain access to the electives that are there for the other majors. So for instance, I came in as an acting major. I had to audition to get into the program, but I wanted to take a lot of the classes that were in the film department, but they don't want non-film students to be able to take those classes because they don't want film students to get placed out of them. So they make it kind of hard. And I had to stay for a couple of summers taking extra prerequisites at Emerson. But it's the kind of thing where like, if you're hard-nosed enough about it and the department chairs can tell like you really do have a vision for what you want to do, they'll let you in.
I know you were a freshman when you were on Def Poetry Jam, right? Mm-hmm. And did you feel like just ready to be out? You were performing and touring. Were you like really ready to be done with college?
In a way, especially because I took that year off and I felt kind of old. I was like, 20, almost 24 by the time I graduated. And I was a little antsy to get out into the world. But I also loved being in college and taking classes and doing performances with my friends, and we had a performance troupe together on campus. So I had a bit of a split mentality about it. I was also doing so when I got on Def Poetry freshman year, that opportunity led me to the college circuit performing, and I spent my last 2.5 years of Emerson stacking my classes on Monday and Wednesday, and I'd take really long days, like 8-hour days of all my classes, and then I had this college booking agent, and a lot of weekends I would go Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I would fly out to Iowa or something. They would do these things called block bookings and get me a few college gigs that were driving distance to each other. So I'd like take my classes Monday, Wednesday, and then I'd fly from Boston Logan on a Thursday morning out to Minneapolis and then drive to like North Dakota or something. And then I'd spend 3 days out in the Midwest, and then I'd come back and take my classes again. So I felt like I was already working when I was doing the performance thing when I was in college. It was exhausting though, those last couple of years.
Did you think you'd translate it to music? Like was that the ultimate hope, or was it just a cool way to make some money?
Music was always something that I wanted to do, but I had a lot of people tell me it wasn't viable. At that point, sort of like you touched on earlier in the conversation, there were only a few sort of examples for what a non-traditional rapper could be. And it wasn't like now where the rules are blown off of everything. Like you can be whatever you want. And in some ways, the more unique you are, the better it is, because the more likely you are to stand out. At that point, it was like, because you had to be on a major or one of these like well-respected indies to break through, there weren't an infinite number of ways it felt like you could be. Those rules were probably, things that people perceived, but were never really there to begin with. But a lot of people were like, yo, you're going to be a rapper? Haha. Like, yeah, right. What do you write about? What do you rap about? Because people's minds were very limited in terms of what they expected from the genre. So I always wanted to be a rapper. I always felt like it was going to happen, but it took a while. I was mostly just like getting my bookings off of spoken word gigs for years. It wasn't until I had that viral video in 2011 that it started to flip around the other way, where I had a bigger audience for my music than for my poetry.
Being from the Bay, I feel like there's always this, when I go back there, I was there like last week, there's this freedom of being optimistic, being loud, being yourself, being over the top, being like, I'm always curious and like asking questions. And when I've gone to other places, I realized that that's kind of an exception. You know what I'm saying? Like being able to just be like intoxicated with life and people and this world is something that I treasure about being from the Bay. And I think like for me and my music, you know, it's nichey, but it's like, that's what I think has drawn my fans and the people I've worked with to that kind of spirit. And I see that in you too. And I've always like loved that about how you balance song structure and storytelling with that, whether it's existentialist angst or joy or love. And yeah, I just wonder like if...
Thank you.
Yeah. No, I just wonder if that was you feeling that to come up to get on and break through, like you had to prove yourself twice as much.
I wouldn't say that. I think especially dangerous for a white person to be like, yeah, I had to work twice as hard because I was different, because I had so many other things handed to me. I never had to worry that, you know, I wasn't going to have a roof over my head or eat, or that I wouldn't be taken seriously in academic environments because I have so many privilege checkboxes checked off. So the things that are standing in my way to achieve what I want, I feel like are very small potatoes to the kind of hurdles other people have to jump over. So I don't really feel like I had to work twice as hard. I guess I just always felt like I would have a different pathway than other people. And that if you're creative and resourceful, you can turn those things into your advantages. I've just really always believed in the strength as weakness, or the weakness as strength philosophy. There's a Kanye line, everything I'm not makes me everything I am. That it's just so true. You know, your quirks, your things that have held you back, those are gonna be the swords in your sheaths. And it's always felt like that for me. So no, I've never really worried about that. My dad used to drive me to school in high school, and he would get really stressed out when cars would pull in front of us on the road. He's a kind of stressed out driver. And my feeling was always like, why are you stressed out that there's a car double parked there, or that somebody turned in front of us? We're on a public road, you know, like everyone's trying to get somewhere. The only thing that's guaranteed is people are going to get in our way on the way. So for that to stress us out and surprise us just feels like wasted stress and energy. And I view like life and career the same way. It's like people are going to pull out in front of you. You're going to get cut off. Like a lane is going to be closed, and there's going to be a way to get where you're going. And I think that mentality has helped me stress out a little bit less the last few years.
That's a very good metaphor. And I think that like in my career, that's where I've tried to get to the point where I can make the music I want, tour and I want. You know, I just got married, and like being able to like be in a stable relationship and have all these things that in my 20s, the chaos of the road, I was speeding. You know what I'm saying? Like I was cutting people off. And like you spoke on the podcast with Spose that I really related to this, that you said that being a touring musician always would give you a reason to, if a relationship wasn't working out, well, sorry, this is who I am. And now you said you're dating someone. Like, I remember when we talked a few years ago, you talked about how you had restless feet. And I really relate to that because I dated so many different people, and I remember them around my different album cycles.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you also said something about how, what was it? You said that we're in this business because we're broken people, right? And I wonder how you feel about that now, you know?
I do remember having that conversation with Spose, and I think the context for that was looking at people who stay on the road for long periods of time, and that becomes a lifestyle, and that lifestyle can be a crutch. I think there is a pathway to sustainability, and that's the one I'm trying to find, where, you know, I don't know if it necessarily means I need to own a house or be locked down to one physical place, but I think that it's that feeling of just being comfortable with where you're at and also still excited for where you're going. The person that I'm dating right now, I just feel like so relaxed and comfortable around her, and feel like there's never any pressure to do anything more than enjoy the present moment, but at the same time, you can still be so excited for possibilities and have that thrill of always trying to discover something new and do something that you haven't done before. And so that feels really, really exciting for me. Yeah, and I don't know what the next few years hold, but I do still feel, this is something that my dad told me a few years ago when we were talking about this concept of what age do you picture yourself at, regardless of how old you are. And I think the actual technical phrase that he used was, it was like continuous identity or something. And he was talking about how he saw himself as in his 30s, no matter how old he got. And he said, maybe this sounds crazy, George, but despite the fact that I'm in my 70s, I still feel like I have these endless possibilities laid out in front of me. And I really related to that. I feel that too. I feel so energized when I think about all of the different directions that life could take. So I feel, I'm, always going to be a constant up and down pendulum swing of life, but I'm feeling energized and excited.
That idea of infinite possibilities, a few years ago, a rapper friend of mine, he's a Christian rapper, he explained that that's how he sees the idea of God or a higher power, is that infinite possibilities being that it's not a literal thing, but it's that faith that you can do a million things and the world is like, going back to talking about being like having that spirit from the Bay Area that I carry with me, that there's always something awesome around the corner. And it's like, remember, I know you're a Calvin and Hobbes fan, the final strip, it's a magical world, Hobbes, oh buddy, let's go exploring.
Yeah.
Like that is that perspective I relate to. And I think if I ever have lost it, I've regained it. And like, that is kind of the, what gives momentum to my creativity.
Sure. Well, you can't really know that you have something unless you have the experience of not having it. And that's something I say at a lot of my shows. It's a mantra that I feel like I need to constantly remind myself of, but that there's no light without darkness. There's no joy without heartbreak. If you don't have an experience of pain, then you have no context for what joy is. And it's only, it's only by holding something up in comparison to what you could be missing that you really know how lucky you are. So I think that's totally true.
That gratitude in like unspoken gratitude, like having that is really important. And I think that I've never seen this in you, like watching your videos and seeing your shows, that you've ever felt jaded or wronged by the music industry. I don't think that's something, a vibe I don't get. Am I right in that?
No, I don't feel wronged. I feel lucky. I mean, I have a career. I'm making my living doing this. I'm able to support my friends. I mean, it's like glass half empty, glass half full. Like, yeah, sure. Okay. Maybe certain things bounce a different way along the road, and maybe I could be bigger than I am and making more money, and it works the other way around too. That mentality of like, oh, I've been fucked, I've been wronged, like it works the other way. Like I could so easily not be in this position. I've also made mistakes, that I got lucky to not have my career ripped out from under me. Like when I had that stage dive in London in 2013, like I could have lost my career there, and I would tell you that wouldn't have been unfair for me to lose it, because it was such a reckless decision. And the fact that like I'm still people are still showing up, and like that didn't derail everything that I have going on. Like it could have, and it wouldn't have been wrong. And I just feel extremely fortunate.
That woman, is she okay? Right? Everything turned out okay?
I mean, she broke her arm. I wasn't in a lot of conversation with her. There were actually two people that got injured, one of whom had a back problem. And I was talking to him for a while and have emailed him over the years. And it's possible he's still in some chronic pain. Like I don't keep up with them monthly, and I don't get the sense they want me to. I didn't talk to the woman at all, really, except for the fact that I went to trial. I pled guilty for this in England. I lived in London for 5 months, and she submitted a court statement that she was in a lot of pain. So I actually don't know. And it's possible, and it's something that troubles me to feel like I've probably been a net negative on this person's life, that that's something that, I live with. And it was a broken arm. I don't know how bad it's continued to be over the years, but I do think about it and hate the idea that I'm coming into someone's life and having them leave worse for it.
You kind of touched on it on the album you made after it. You had a verse about it, right?
I had a couple songs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember when I first met up with you, you were going through all that, and it's like, but it's awesome how it didn't derail you, and how you've made it positive, and that you're respectful about it and still think about it.
It's always going to be complicated. It should be complicated for the people who listen to me. Like I'm not a perfect individual who's made all the right choices along the way, and everyone can weigh that for what it is. I feel like I learned from it, but at the same time, like your life is a product of the choices that you make, and I respect that, and hopefully we'll just own up to it whenever that happens. It's a lot of responsibility, I think. Also, this sort of idea, it's something I touched on in my Welcome to the Family song, but how there's this, I wouldn't say pressure, but you're rewarded for sort of lifting yourself up as a hero and creating a hero myth around yourself as an artist, because people, I think, gravitate towards somebody that they want to follow, that has ideals that they believe in, that they can get behind. And there's this very strange interplay between, like, yeah, it's great to project good values, but also nobody is really a hero. Like, a hero is a construct. We're complicated individuals, and where's that line between being an artist and being like a self-styled cult leader?
That's a good question. There's that Chuck Klosterman has a great essay about Kurt Cobain juxtaposed with David Koresh, and he kind of like makes the point that David Koresh was more sane because he didn't want to, when he was revered as a rock star and a leader, he said, "I deserve this," versus like he talks about how when Courtney Love bought a Lexus, Kurt was like, "You need to return it. That's not in line with our values."
Yeah.
It's an interesting essay. And it's like being a hero is something that's in the eyes of other people, right? It's like you can create that archetypal myth, but ultimately you don't have control over it. And it can be taken away if something bad happens or some truth comes out. And so it's dangerous, right? It's like a dangerous, I don't know. I wouldn't want to be considered a hero to the world.
Yeah.
It's scary.
I mean, that honestly, looking at how much scrutiny, I mean, like the Ariana Grande and Pete Davidson thing, like I watched that unfold, and my feeling is like, oh man, I can't imagine wanting that. Like, that's so much scrutiny. It seemed like being on an indie level where you have your fans that like what you do, but you're not being like harangued by this throng of people. In a way, I feel like it's the ideal spot to be at. You get to do what you love. You get to create your work and have an audience of people who like you for what you are. And you don't need to worry about that like endless noise and chatter like that, to not have your anonymity walking around. So yeah, I feel really grateful. Honestly, this like middle tier artist level, I think, is a really attractive one.
And a sustainable one, right?
And a sustainable one too. Yeah. Like, for instance, if you have a big radio hit, sometimes the mentality is like, oh, well, what's the follow-up? And you have this pressure to just be knocking out these mega hits. But I look at someone like E40 or Tech 9. I never feel like E40 fell off. It's just he can't. He's
only gotten better.
Yeah, he's a legend. Like if you maintain at this independent level and you keep producing and you keep working hard, I think you have an opportunity to just basically work forever.
Have you met E40?
No, I follow him on Twitter. But
yeah,
that's it.
I met him once at South by Southwest, and obviously he didn't know who I was, but I had my A's cap on, and he thought I was tight. I got this vibe from him, shaking his hand. Like I was with my friend Claire, and she's like, he has such a great energy around him, and I felt that, and like that. I think, I mean, on a metaphysical level, that comes from there's something more to when you step to the mic or when you write down. You're trying to channel something bigger, and that's the longevity. I mean, I don't know, like what are some things that bigger than music that you have faith in, or things you believe in that are like intangible or tangible, you know?
Well, I was raised agnostic, and I would say that I'm an atheist leaning agnostic, but I don't believe in fate or a grand design to why we're here. But what I do believe in is how much I like being here, how passionate I am about being alive, and how much I believe in beauty and my own perception of beauty and form. And the life that I want to live includes the possibility that you can create structure and meaning around your own life. And if you give it that structure and meaning, that you can step into that form. And what I mean by that is, like, I might not believe in the same way a Christian believes that our lives have been planned out, but by giving myself a plan that I like and choosing to live in that, there is such a self-fulfilling prophecy to that, for manifesting that world. And I really believe in creating structure, creating beauty, creating symmetry for yourself, and then allowing your life to have that symmetry. And it's so gratifying to me to try and have an idea and watch it pay off. You know, like, think about a vacation that I would love to take with somebody, and it seeming crazy, and then just going and doing it, and finding ways that, you know, my life story intersects with the person that I'm in love with, and finding meaning and beauty in that. And so I think my work is a lot about that. Just this idea that, like, I feel like we have no idea why we're here. We have these strategies to cope with making life seem normal, when really, in its basic level, like, nobody has any fucking idea about the very bare bones of anything, and we're all just trying to muddle through it. So, you know, I have a lot of that existentialism in my work. I'm trying to move it from existential angst to maybe more existential wonder, and have both those things interplay. But I mean, I think that's what it's all about, is like, why are we here? What are we doing? How can we give these our lives meaning? Those things that, you know, I feel like we should be screaming at people in the street every day, like, what the fuck is going on? Like, we don't understand any of this. We just go about our business like everything's normal. And I think that's what I want the core of my work to be about.
The mass of men living lives of quiet desperation quote,
Yeah.
right? Like that. Yeah, we try to put on a face and we speculate on why we're all here, just so we don't go crazy.
Yeah.
And so we can have like order and stability. Are you optimistic about the future as this world becomes increasingly like crazy?
Oh man, that's a good question. I have pessimistic parents. The previous relationship that I was in, I had a girlfriend who was incredibly optimistic about technology, and that was very inspiring to me. And I'd say my current relationship too. I'm dating somebody who's a real optimist, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that I have both pessimistic and optimistic qualities. Trump troubles me so much. The fact that he could get elected troubles me so much. I don't see the forces that elected Trump dying quietly. I see things getting worse before they get better in terms of politics, and the fact that in the United States, we've never actually dealt with the fallout from slavery, and, you know, that it's an intractable problem. It's something, you know, like the fact that these like xenophobic neocons are rising in prominence all over the world is not a coincidence. It's the fact that, like, we've made these devil's bargains throughout history, and built these massive empires off of basically like slave labor or close to slave labor, and created this capitalist monster. Like, it's not going to die easy. There's just no solution in my head with that doesn't involve pain and suffering and you know, tragedy of some kind. In terms of whether we're going towards like a utopian singularity or painful destruction, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so you're very realistic about it, because you don't know, right? Yeah.
I just don't know. I mean, one argument that I had with that previous girlfriend that we never really reached a conclusion on was, she was so excited for 3D printers and how they had the potential to solve world hunger. And you can for 3D print food, like we can, if we have the chemical building blocks, we can put food on every starving person's table in the world. And that seems really reasonable to me and really awesome. And my response, that probably, the little parent's voice in the back of my head that raised me, is thinking, well, what's stopping one madman from 3D printing a nuclear bomb? If we can put that technology in the hands of a single person, then we don't have like this safety net of mutually assured destruction to keep people from dropping bombs everywhere. It just takes, the person with the school shooter mentality suddenly has the power to print an atom bomb. Like, that scares me too. So I'm optimistic, and then there's the worried side of me for sure too.
Yeah, you're tapped into both sides. I feel like that is, and that's kind of the balance that maybe keeps us all neutral, because we're like, it's like we have the stimulant of the joy of the future and the depressant of like what could happen. And we both have seen like a lot of the world and a lot of the country. And, I wonder if the perspective we have from our fans is we meet people who are excited to meet us, who often are like optimistic and they're drawn to like quirky, intelligent music. So we see a subsection that maybe the world doesn't see of like creative, interesting people. Mm-hmm. But then there are like people who maybe listen to us who aren't heroes. You know what I'm saying? Like there's this, we see this subsection of the world. Like I found when all the stuff went down in 2016, that a lot of the nerdcore and the fans there's a lot of alt-right people in the mix there who saw it as like non-threatening rap music because it's far from its cultural origins. And that, man, to be honest, George, that was like profoundly troubling. And I kind of was a little more cautious about what I posted. But I'm not being political, but I think you and I have probably seen a subsection of great and like darkness in the people we've met through touring. I don't know. Would you mind speaking on that? Like, have you had a similar experience or no?
Yeah, I mean, I had a shooting threat at a particular show, and it seemed very credible, and it was by somebody who was a fan of me. And I don't want to go into it in too much detail. Don't want to freak people out too much, but it was during the 2016 election cycle, and it was really dark. It was like this person was posting my lyrics, and some of my lyrics, that songs like Talking to Myself, that I think speak to people who are feeling a lot of disconnection from the world and angst, and also posting a lot of NRA MAGA stuff. And I was really outspoken about wanting Hillary to win the election once she was nominated. And so there were a certain element of my fan base that was like, wait, what the fuck? Like, they were very upset. So yeah, I don't know exactly where I was going with that, except to say that I have seen that too a little bit. I've been trying to think about like, how much do I believe in adding to the echo chamber? Because I know that audiences self-select, and the more vocal you are, the more likely you are to lose the people who disagree with you, who are maybe the people who you need to reach the most. But I also think it's really important to lay your cards on the table right now and not be afraid of speaking your mind, because it's really dangerous too, that you take too much the other approach and you become bland and inoffensive because you don't want to alienate anybody, and then you're not saying anything at all. So it's a difficult line to walk. It's one that I was trying to do a lot when I was playing the Midwest and doing the college circuit, because I was often playing for these religious colleges where those were the ones that had all the bookings. They're these small liberal arts schools that were either like Baptist or Lutheran, a lot of people who had very conservative views, especially around abortion. And it's like, how do I go in front of this audience that, and even anti-gay rights too, at that point in like 2007, 2008, when it didn't feel so much like a settled issue amongst young people. And I had to get in front of these audiences that I knew disagreed with me on some fundamental issues, and try and win them over enough to make them listen to what I had to say, when it feels like we're in such a binary argumentative system right now. And the whole like talking heads yelling at each other on MSNBC and Fox just disgusts me. I don't like that just news as entertainment system that we've sort of gotten ourselves into.
Yeah, and that if you say one thing, there's an implication that you disagree with something else, when really it's like the truth is gray.
Yeah.
There's a whole like weird permeable membrane, and I feel like art and music and poetry has the ability to touch people in a way that what we create now says something about how certain people of a certain world feel about this changing world that is like very telling for the future. It feels like it's the scrolling credits to a intro to a Star Wars movie, not to belittle it or like to trivialize it, but I wonder if you feel that in your art and your writing, that you have this platform, you have young people around the world who care what you have to say, and like if the weight of that agency is liberating or if it's kind of like stultifying. What do you think?
I feel a lot more freedom talking about politics in some ways, politics and social issues, than I do about talking about my personal life. So yeah, I think that in terms of writing about politics, the thing that gives me the most pause is how I'm presenting an issue. For instance, I had a song called Stick to Your Guns on my previous album, and I wasn't afraid about letting people know where I stood on the idea of gun control. That was easy for me. But the way that I structured the song was that you had 3 different verses, each from a different perspective. And the first perspective is, and if it's basically revolving around a single unnamed shooting event that's sort of generic enough that it feels like it could be any of the mass shootings that's happened in the last few years. And the first person that you hear from in the first verse is the speaker who's about to is the shooter who's about to commit the act. The second person that you hear from is a news anchor who's commenting on the act that just happened. And the third person is a politician that's eulogizing it like a week later, but not doing anything about it. And I felt like I was really concerned about how people were going to absorb the song, especially because I'm choosing to speak from the perspective of a shooter, which just even empathizing with somebody, like putting yourselves in your shoes, is a choice to make. You're choosing to humanize somebody who's done something that's very inhumane. And I worried especially about how people who'd experienced shootings and how and people who have a closer relationship maybe to someone who'd passed in a shooting might feel that was an incredibly disrespectful way to approach that song subject as somebody who hasn't lost someone in a shooting. So that's something I thought about a lot. I ultimately obviously decided to put it on my album because I felt like I do what gives me the right to a perspective on that issue is being an American who lives in this world, and that in and of itself is gives me a perspective on the issue. I haven't really heard from anybody who's had that reaction I was afraid of, but I have heard from people who are like, who disagree with me on gun control.
I like that song because it was a creative way to like spin the perspective to show that there's not one right answer while also conveying your beliefs, and like it's very convincing song, and it's really like thoughtful. And I thought that was a standout track on your record because you tackled something that it's scary. It's something that's so loaded, so to speak. That's like one of the central issues of the world right now. And like, yeah, man, I always like to see what you're doing because you always have a good take on things, and you give me optimism as an older rapper who's grown up like in appreciating your stuff. That there's good stuff out there, and
right
I appreciate that, man. George, I wanted to end with one more question.
Sure.
And I'm wondering, we touched on this earlier about the concept of heroes, right? And I'm wondering, as you've reached your 30s now and like continue to do music and have become a hero to a lot of young people, have how you've seen certain heroes from the past, has that changed? Or do you still like revere a lot of your people you looked up to in a similar way? Because I know you're a huge baseball fan, a huge music fan, a huge media fan. Like having become a hero, how does that make you feel about the people you saw as heroes as a kid?
Well, I guess we touched on it earlier, the idea that like a hero is a construct. Everybody is a complicated, flawed individual, some more flawed than others. I mean, I would say that nobody who's been felled by the Me Too movement so far has been somebody who was like somebody that I had a poster of on my wall or something growing up. But it does reinforces this idea that there's so many people that are styled as heroes out there who just aren't, who aren't what we think they are. And I guess I'm more jaded than as a kid. Also growing up as a baseball fan in what I later found out was the steroid era.
Right.
I think I always knew that Barry Bonds was roided, and he wasn't my favorite baseball player growing up, but my favorite baseball player, Matt Williams, was on the Mitchell report and, was a PED user. So that I think was a bit of a moment, realizing that, seeing what, I think the most extreme example of something like that in the sports world, maybe Lance Armstrong, just this like, and he's an extreme example of that because he really went to great lengths to style himself as a hero. And participating in his own legacy creation as that, the Live Strong stuff. And there's just egregious things where he's going into hospitals, talking to kids who have cancer and using his experience as a cancer survivor to accept these laurels that are being heaped on him. And then it comes out like, oh, it was just everything about the winning the Tour de France, like that Nike commercial where they say, "What are you on?" "Oh, I'm on my bike busting my ass." Oh, right. Well, but also a whole bunch of steroids too. It's insane.
The steroids kind of caused the cancer, or they contributed to it?
No. I think he had testicular cancer that was separate from his steroid use. Right. But he was also juicing the entire time he was winning the Tour de France.
Okay.
Like over the years, over and over and over again, lying about it, sabotaging teammates who knew about it. George Hincapie, who was going to come out and blow the lid off it. And he was very ruthless in terms of trying to silence people who knew about his history, and in completely indefensible ways over and over and over again. So, yeah.
Do you have any heroes that, like, when I think some of my heroes, Poe is obviously one of my heroes because he turned pain into something beautiful. Weird Al is still a huge hero to me because of just his impact and his good morals. You know what I mean? Like, are there a few people that stick out to you as like, yes, that have stayed in that pantheon for you? Or
it shifts a little bit. I have so much respect for Lin-Manuel Miranda and how he's using his platform from Hamilton to not just pay lip service to social justice, but to like go to Puerto Rico and put a show on there. And like, I think that he's made all of these choices in the aftermath of Hamilton blowing up that make it clear that his art is not just about elevating his own legacy, but is actually about changing the world for the better. So I view him as a hero, even though I didn't know him as a hero in my youth, didn't know him at all when I was a kid. But he's somebody that I hugely admire right now. And I think that a big part of this conversation is the way that the idea of separating the art and the individual has evolved in terms of the way the public sees it over the last decade or so. And I think that the like academic consensus 10 years or more ago was that a piece of great art can exist independent from its creator. And that idea has really been challenged. And I think importantly so. We know more about, we didn't have Edgar Allan Poe's Twitter account to just pore over and obsess over when he was around. But now we do have those things. And I think that holding artists to a higher standard and realizing that like, as much as we can hold people accountable to be consistent with the art they're creating, it does matter. In my opinion, it matters. And there are definitely, like Lynn, other people out there who are doing that too, who I think are taking responsibility for that scrutiny and embracing it.
That's good. That's a very good message. And that's kind of like the punk rock idea of like separating the barrier between the stage and the audience. We can all lift ourselves, in hip hop too, right? The participatory culture element. We can all lift ourselves up and like we're accountable, and being on stage doesn't make you separate from or ethereal or otherworldly. It makes you, the work you do on earth is more relevant than ever. You know? So on that note, this is going to air on New Year's Eve. What do you have coming up for 2019? Anything you can share that you have it?
Yeah, well, I'm going on tour. I have this album coming out called Complaint, which is 9 songs long. I've been teasing it for a while. Yeah, it's a big tour. It starts on January 30th in Nashville, and then I get to open for Living Legends and Atmosphere and De La Soul at Red Rocks the next night, which I'm so fucking stoked for.
That's awesome.
And got a week off after that. We got Anchorage coming up. I love playing Alaska, so I'm probably going to spend a week there and maybe make some music and ski for a little bit before the tour really gets going in full. February 15th in Madison, and then we play the US, we play Europe. All my tickets and everything is on sale at georgewatsky.com, and I got pre-sales for my album up. So that's the big stuff. I have some other stuff that I'll tell you once the mic's off.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, working hard, getting out there.
Well, I'm going to come check you out. You'll be in New York, obviously, right?
Yeah, we're playing the PlayStation on, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. georgewatsky.com.
Yeah.
Get those tickets. Thank you for your time, man.
You're welcome. Thank you for talking to me.
I appreciate it. Of the kitchen, we went on many missions and amazing expeditions, flying through the pages on that magic school bus. Shel Silverstein wrote Shotgun, but it was up to us to peel apart the layers and search for the dragons. The cats wearing hats, Curious George and Peter Rabbit. The newest, freshest books, Mom always brought them home. Then in high school it was Steinbeck, Keats, and Edgar Allan Poe.
Don't let the memories fade, we gotta make them last. I was still a baby when Grandma Katie passed, and passed on her hardcover novels with the Sutherland nameplates, our family gospel. Cause I'm not sure if the Lord is above, but I know your mother is alive in the stories you love, that you read to us when we were little until we were grown. And I'm gonna pass them on when I got some kids of my own. Kids of my own.
Of the monsters in the closet, it would be alright. Reading Goosebumps up at Tahoe on those summer nights.
Of a moaning ghost or of a pile of bones. Even when the floorboards groaned.
Did Stuart Little give up? No. He always persevered. You came on stage at Warped Tour, remember how they cheered? And unlike Jackie Paper, I'll be back to Honolulu to play you my new demos cause you're so honest with me. At home you won't put up with that rapper ego crap, cause to you I'm still Andrew and I'll always treasure that. I'd choose my own adventure, it's taken me so far. Ghost riding giant beaches, catching seagulls with these bars.
Keep all your nickels and dimes, feed me your riddles and rhymes, read me your wrinkle in time, build me a bridge out to Terabithia, meet me at 9 on the mysterious island right at the scene of the crime. Come with Captain Nemo, but I'm emo, don't leave me behind, staring at the sun out on the Cape till we're legally blind. Treasony, mutiny on the Bounty, just carry me there, out by where the red fern grows and then bury me there. Bury me there.
Of the Twits or the Grinch or even Captain Hook. Of Bugs, Bunsen Bean, no I was never shook.
Of the Grendel or a Ichabod Crane. Even when the tripods came.
Now suddenly, for the first time, I am ready to be alive.
And if I ever have kids, I'll read them Stregonona, Lyle, Lau, Crocodile, Matilda, and Ramona.
I'll never give them the back of my hand, give them the Giver, the River, Hatchet, and Raggedy Ann.
And even as a rat fiend, mama, you always kept my hats clean, mama.
Even though we have seen trauma, you always had the vaccine, mama.
Of getting lost in Narnia because we had a map. In those Oakland hills, sitting on my mama's lap.
In Jumanji or of Anansi, there's no orc or Morlock that haunts me.
I was never afraid. afraid. I was never afraid. I was never afraid.
Thank you, George. Freaking tight. I thought it was appropriate to end with our collaboration. You can bump that on Spotify, check out the YouTube video, etc., etc. Next week, we got Quelly Chris. Quelly Chris and his wife, Jean Grey, who's a veteran rapper, made an album called Everything's Fine. And it was the #1 album on Bandcamp last year, which I thought was kind of cool. It's a great record. Quelly Chris's solo stuff is awesome. He got to start doing like some production for Danny Brown, and he's an incredible rapper. He's actually on the Dewey Decibel System album I'm dropping with Mega Ran. He's on the Watchmen track. So those of you who pre-ordered the record will have heard his ill verse. He's our guest next week. He came by the spot. We talked about his inspiration. He said some interesting stuff about how poetry and rapping is kind of like writing magic spells, which was kind of tight. So check that out. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you again. Please tell your friends. Please leave a review, a comment, yada, yada, all that flavor. And I'll see y'all next week. And I'll see you next year. Get it? Next year, because it's 29. All right. Peace.